My name is Faith Burt, and I'm 45 years old. For most of my life, I believed I was living proof that love, real love, could survive time, mistakes, and even other people's jealousy. I thought if you were patient enough, kind enough, forgiving enough, everything would eventually fall into place. That belief cost me 6 years of my life. I met my husband, Ethan Burt, when we were 14. We were children, pretending to understand adulthood, sitting on the bleachers after school, talking about everything and nothing. He was gentle in a way that made you feel safe. I was loud, opinionated, stubborn. Somehow, we balanced each other perfectly. My parents adored Ethan immediately. My mother used to joke that she finally got the son she never had. My father pulled Ethan aside before our wedding and gave him the same advice he'd once given me. Communicate. Think before you act. Protect your family. I believe those words were carved into stone. Ethan and I married young, but we grew up together instead of apart. Over the years, we built a life that felt unbreakable. We had 4 daughters, Natalie, Paige, Olivia, and Sophie, each one different, each one a piece of my heart walking around outside my body. Our house was loud, messy, alive. It was the kind of home people said felt warm the moment they walked in. And standing just outside that happiness was my younger sister, Lena. Lena is 2 years younger than me. Growing up, she was always the one everyone noticed. Better grades, sharper tongue, easier smile. My parents praised her constantly, not because they didn't love me, but because Lena demanded attention in a way I never did. I learned early how to be the understanding one. I also learned how to ignore my instincts. When Ethan and I were still dating, I noticed the way Lena looked at him. It wasn't obvious, nothing dramatic, just small things. The way she lingered near him at family gatherings. The way she laughed too hard at his jokes. The way she always found an excuse to text him about something meaningless. I told myself I was imagining it. Then we got engaged. That was when Lena finally said it out loud. She cornered Ethan one afternoon while I was at work and confessed that she had loved him since high school, that she thought he'd made a mistake marrying me, that if he ever changed his mind, she'd be waiting. Ethan came home shaken. He didn't hesitate. He told me everything, every word, every look, every uncomfortable second of that conversation. I felt something inside me snap. Lena had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I wanted her gone from our lives completely. No contact, no forgiveness, no second chances. I didn't care that she was my sister. Blood didn't give her permission to betray me. But once again, I was asked to be understanding. My parents begged me not to tear the family apart. They insisted Lena had spoken out of loneliness and insecurity, not malice. Ethan, ever the peacemaker, said he wanted peace. He believed people could change. I didn't want to disappoint anyone. So I swallowed my anger. I convinced myself that forgiveness was strength, that letting go made me the bigger person. Lena apologized. She cried. She promised she'd never cross that line again. Life moved on, or at least it pretended to. Years passed. Ethan and I focused on raising our daughters, managing work, paying bills, building a future. Lena stayed close to the family but kept her distance from Ethan, or so I thought. My parents praised me for being mature, for handling it well. Sometimes, late at night, I'd replay that moment in my head. The confession, the apology, the uneasy feeling that never quite went away. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then came the week that destroyed everything. I had been away on a work trip for several days. When I came home, the house felt wrong. Too quiet. Too tense. The air felt heavy, like something awful had already happened and no one knew how to say it out loud. Ethan was sitting in the living room with our daughters, and Lena. Their faces were red, tear-streaked, furious. The moment I stepped inside, Natalie looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Paige started crying. Olivia wouldn't meet my eyes. Sophie clutched Ethan's arm like she was afraid I'd take him away. Before I could even ask what was wrong, Ethan stood up. "How could you do this to us?" he demanded. I laughed, an automatic, confused sound. Do what? Lena didn't look at me. She stared at the floor like she was already grieving something. Ethan pulled out his phone and shoved it toward me. Photos, messages, screenshots that supposedly showed me cheating with a coworker. Intimate words I had never written. Moments I had never lived. My hands started shaking. "This isn't real," I whispered. "I've never cheated on you, ever." Lena finally spoke. She said a coworker of mine, someone she claimed to know, had confessed everything to her. that he'd sent proof, that she'd tried to protect Ethan and the girls. I felt like I was drowning. I begged Ethan to listen to me. I told him Lena had tried to steal him once before, that she was lying, that nothing in those messages made sense. He didn't hear a word. He slapped me. Hard. I was thrown out of my own home that night. My daughters screamed at me as if I were a stranger, as if I were the villain in a story they'd already decided was true. And just like that, the family I had spent my life protecting turned its back on me. What I didn't know then was this. Lena hadn't just waited for her chance. She had planned it, and she was only getting started. I didn't know where to go that night. I stood outside the house I'd lived in for over 20 years, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I finally picked them up again. The porch light was still on, casting a warm glow through the window, the same light that used to mean home. Now it felt like a warning. I drove without direction for nearly an hour. I don't remember the roads. I don't remember the music on the radio. All I remember is the sound of my daughters screaming inside my head. "How could you do this, Mom? You're disgusting. I never want to see you again." Those words hurt more than the slap. I ended up in a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering lights and a front desk clerk who didn't ask questions. I sat on the bed fully clothed, staring at the wall, replaying every second in my mind, searching for the moment where reality had split in two. I called Ethan, straight to voicemail. I texted him paragraphs at first, then sentences, then just one line over and over again. "Please believe me." No response. The next morning, my parents called. For a split second, hope flared in my chest. Surely they'd listen. Surely they knew me better than this. They didn't. My father's voice was cold, controlled. He told me that what I'd done had humiliated the family, that Ethan and the girls were devastated, that Lena had done the right thing by telling the truth, even though it hurt her to do so. I screamed. I told them Lena had already tried to steal my husband once. I begged them to remember that, to remember who she was. My mother cried softly and said, "People make mistakes, Faith. If you were truly sorry, you'd make this divorce easy on Ethan." Divorce. They had already decided. By the end of the week, Ethan had filed. He refused to meet me in person. Everything went through lawyers. I wasn't allowed back into the house to collect my things unless Lena was present to avoid conflict. That alone should have told me everything. But I explained things away. That's what I do. That's what I've always done. My daughters blocked my number one by one. Natalie was the last. Her final message read, "You are a disgrace to this family." I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Some days I couldn't even get out of bed. Therapy was the only reason I survived those first months. The therapist said I was experiencing something called familial annihilation, when a person loses their entire support system at once. It felt exactly like that. The divorce was finalized in record time. I signed papers I barely read just to make the pain stop. I didn't fight for assets. I didn't fight for the house. I didn't fight for anything. I thought if I let go quietly, they might come back. They didn't. At the beginning of 2017, I got the message that shattered whatever was left of me. Natalie sent it, just one sentence. "Lena and Dad got married today." I stared at my phone for a long time, waiting for my brain to correct the words, waiting for reality to push back. It never did. My sister married my husband. My daughters attended the wedding. I was erased. For a long time after that, I didn't want to live. I won't pretend otherwise. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if the world would be quieter without me in it. The only reason I'm here today is because of a gray rescue cat I adopted on a whim one afternoon. He needed me, so I stayed. 5 years passed with no contact. No birthdays, no holidays, no updates. I rebuilt my life piece by piece, learning how to exist without the people I loved most. Then, one evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. When I did, all I heard was sobbing. "Faith," my mother whispered. "We're so sorry." My chest went tight. I asked her why she was calling now. She said Lena had been drunk, that she and Ethan had fought, that in a moment of rage, Lena screamed. I didn't destroy her life just to end up miserable. That was how the truth came out. My mother said everything else needed to be discussed in person. I told her not to contact me again until I was ready. She said she understood. I hung up and sat there in silence, realizing something terrifying. The truth doesn't always heal. Sometimes it just opens the wound again. I waited 3 days before I agreed to see my parents. 3 days of staring at my phone. 3 days of pacing my apartment. 3 days of telling myself I didn't owe them anything, and then arguing with myself that maybe I still did. In the end, I went because I needed answers more than I needed peace. I arrived early Saturday morning. The house looked exactly the same. Same white door, same wind chimes on the porch. For a moment, I felt 18 again, coming home after a bad date, knowing my parents would be there to catch me. My mother opened the door and broke down instantly. She wrapped her arms around me like she was afraid I'd disappear again. I stood stiffly. My father didn't hug me, he shook my hand. That hurt more than I expected. Inside, everything felt painfully normal. The coffee table still had the nick Ethan made when he moved furniture years ago. The smell of my mother's cooking made my stomach twist. She tried to make small talk, told me I looked healthier, that I'd lost weight. When you're depressed, I replied flatly, you forget to eat. Silence fell over the room. I asked them how they found out the truth. My mother explained that Ethan and Lena had been arguing for months, that Lena had grown paranoid, controlling, that one night she screamed that she planned everything, that she had destroyed me so she could have my life. My father started crying. I had never seen him cry in my entire life. He told me he was sorry, that he had failed me, that forcing me to forgive Lena years ago was the biggest mistake he'd ever made. I listened. I didn't cry. I told them reconciliation would take time. That trust wasn't something you could demand after destroying someone. My mother asked if she could tell Ethan I'd consider speaking to him. I said yes, but on my terms. Later that night, Ethan texted me. He asked if he could call. I told him no. He called anyway. I answered out of curiosity, not hope. His voice sounded older, smaller. He said he was sorry, that he'd been manipulated, that Lena had been his rock after the divorce, and that one thing led to another. Then he told me something that knocked the air out of my lungs. Lena was pregnant. I told him not to expect reconciliation, not to give himself false hope. Before hanging up, he said, I still love you. I said goodbye. A week later, I met my daughters for the first time in 6 years. We met at a park, neutral ground. Natalie ran to me the moment she saw me and collapsed into my arms, sobbing. Paige stood frozen. Olivia cried silently. Sophie looked like a frightened child again. They apologized, over and over. I told them I loved them, but forgiveness would take time. Then Natalie showed me her ring. She'd gotten married 2 years earlier. Ethan walked her down the aisle. I broke. I cried harder than I ever had in my life. Something precious had been stolen from me, and no apology could ever give it back. We agreed to family therapy. As they left, I hugged each of them tightly, wondering if love could survive this kind of damage. I didn't know the answer, but for the first time in 6 years, I was willing to find out. Family therapy started on a gray Friday afternoon. I arrived early, the way I always do when I'm nervous. The waiting room smelled faintly of lavender and old magazines. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, staring at the carpet, rehearsing words I wasn't sure I'd ever say out loud. When my daughters arrived, all 4 of them looked terrified. That didn't bring me satisfaction. It brought me grief. The therapist asked me to start. I told her everything. Not the polite version, not the version that made people comfortable. I told her about the nights I couldn't sleep, about the weeks I wondered if my daughters would be better off without me, about the cat that kept me alive when nothing else did. My daughters cried, hard. Natalie kept apologizing. Paige couldn't stop shaking. Olivia stared at the floor. Sophie clung to her sisters like she was afraid to be left behind again. The therapist said something that stuck with me. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's choosing to move forward without denying the past. After the session, we went to dinner. It was awkward, cautious, fragile, but real. They came back to my place afterward and met my cat. They brought me copies of old photos they'd saved. I held them like they were relics from another life. Over time, conversations became easier. Laughter returned in small doses. Ethan tried to reach out again. I didn't respond. Some things don't deserve a second chance. Lena disappeared from their lives completely. No contact, no updates, no explanations. I don't know what will happen next. I don't know how much of my family I'll get back. But I do know this.